I think I turned like $6,000 in like $195,000 in like 3 months or something.
Damn.
Yo!
Nerds.
The pasta, bro. The pasta is a serious thing, bro. Italians and pasta, they don't play around, bro.
I know, man. I keep feeding the lower half.
What's your like background, Jack?
Yeah, so on my dad's side, everybody's like American, like pretty much like 5-6 generations. They came from Europe at some point, like a long time ago. But my parents on that side, or my grandparents, everybody on that side were like there since like the Civil War.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like long time in the U.S. And then on the other side of my family, Irish.
Irish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's dope. Have you been back to Ireland? Or?
Yeah, a couple times actually. It's pretty sick. It's like I live like traveling to cold destinations or warm destinations, like kind of like rainy weather, like same as here is like, I don't know.
You ever
Yeah,
been
yeah.
to the Amazon? Like some like there?
No, I've never. Oh yeah. Actually, I went in. Okay, maybe not true Amazon, like Brazil or something, but in Belize, they had a sick like kind of Amazon thing in Honduras too.
Ooh, Honduras. That's where my dad's from, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Have you been to every continent?
I've been to every continent but Africa.
But Africa. Are you planning to go?
Like,
or?
yeah. This year I'm gonna try to do safari.
That's
Ooh,
dope,
that's
man.
sick. Okay.
Yeah.
So go. It's a big trip though. Like my girlfriend's down to do it, but it's like, dude, heck, you need like crazy vaccines. Like they give you tons to go.
Oh yeah, you got to get the malaria shot, stuff like that, right?
Dude, my boy went and got he got bit by a mosquito. He didn't get malaria. He got some other like
West Nile?
sickness or something. No, I don't think that'd be gnarly. I don't know if it was West Nile.
I said West Nile.
Well, I'm just thinking. I don't know.
Bro, that's like SARS or some.
Yeah.
You guys are cool with swearing. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
can
I
swear.
swear, yeah.
I think it's like the first
I
3
usually
minutes.
try not
It
to
just
drive.
has to be avoided.
Okay.
Because then YouTube will like they put it like
Demonetize
in,
them?
yeah, no, I don't think they'll demonetize it, but they do like a ranking system like 1 to 10, depending on like if you're swearing right off the bat or whatever.
Yeah.
They'll like put you lower and then you're lower in the advertisement game.
Like in the first 3 minutes, we'll bleep it out, but no, swearing's allowed, bro.
Yeah.
This is a
that's
free flowing
fine. Yeah.
podcast there, bro. Yeah,
How do you
man.
find all that shit out? Is that like you guys got to
Other
plug at
YouTubers.
YouTube?
No, we
Yeah.
need one, but there's like just other YouTubers like just like for example Brad Martin.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
always talking about it. He's like, don't swear in the first 3 minutes, or he'll bleep it, but then he'll swear like the rest of the pod. So
And even Mr. Beast too. Like
Really?
he'll give a lot of insights on like the YouTube algorithm, and we kind of like learn from that. Like we're at a point right now where we're monetizing, but like barely. But like we gotta follow those rules to really like let them pay us.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You got to get put Claudia in there as a mole.
Yeah.
Get her to apply at YouTube.
Oh, literally. I should. We should.
Yeah, I think get her in there and then just get her to start hooking up information
Yeah,
on the back
literally.
end.
Just having Claudia just pushing the NüVida.
Yeah,
It's like the people who have like the people at Twitter or like Facebook
Yeah.
to help them out when they get like banned or something like that.
bro. I was surprised when Mr. Beast went on the Nelk Boys podcast and he said that he doesn't even have a direct contact at YouTube.
Yeah.
I was like, bro, if he doesn't have a direct contact at YouTube, that just means they don't like favor anybody, I guess, or
Yeah.
they try to keep it like even playing field. I just assumed that if you got to a certain point, they would assign someone to you.
Yeah. Like as a business, it's kind of a stupid move for them not to keep him super happy and entertained and making sure that you're staying on YouTube. Right? Like,
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought they'd like, I don't know. I thought they'd be like kissing his ass type thing to like make sure he's all good. But.
Yeah. Damn. But yo, Jack, man, let's get into it, bro.
All right, let's do it.
I'm sure we already got into it, but
Yeah.
last little check.
Are we good to go?
Yeah, good to go. Yeah, man, another episode. What is this? Episode 61, Coca?
Yeah.
Episode 61. Jack, thanks so much for like having us at your house, bro. Beautiful place. And then also like for taking the time with us, bro. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. Super stoked.
Yeah, I guess like a little spiel for those who don't really know you, and then we'll dive deep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Jack Bernstein. Been kind of like a serial entrepreneur, I'd say. Started off, I guess, my career as like a professional sports athlete in snowboarding, and then kind of transitioned my life into business after and stuff like that. And just kind of going with the flow and enjoying life as it is now. And got
How did
no
you get to
complaints.
snowboarding? That's like, I feel like that's a unique sport.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I remember when I was young, I grew up in a poor family, and like I remember being a kid in elementary school, and all the kids played hockey. I grew up in Mississauga, so everybody wanted to play hockey in Ontario, Canada, and it was too expensive to play. So another couple families used to go skiing, so I went with them once, and I tried skiing. And I saw like all the cool kids like kind of snowboard, and I was like, all right, like if I'm going to do this, I'd rather snowboard than ski.
Yeah.
So I saved up my money, bought a snowboard, and then like started going. And then over time, like got good enough to the point where I got sponsored. And then I kind of just took off from there.
And how did you get sponsors like that young?
Yeah, it was cool. It was like an interesting journey. So when I was like 13, I got approached by this team that ended up turning into kind of like the national snowboard team for a while before the Canadian government actually like formalized the process. It's called Icarus for Education. They actually had a TV show on Disney for 2 years that we were on. And kind of like got scouted towards it. And then it was like a professional coaching program where like we traveled all over Canada and stuff like that and like competed. And it was like the best snowboarders in Canada at the time were like some of the coaches and stuff like that. And then after being there a couple years on the team, like competing, getting better and stuff like that, then I got exposed to more brands and like they bridged the introductions and stuff like that. And then snowboarding is weird, right? Like you kind of, being successful in snowboarding is 33% how good you are, 33% how you present yourself in your image, and 33% who you know. So you can have all the sponsors in the world and great financing and stuff like that up to a certain point. You know, your skill does matter. But you can go a lot further with people on the business side. So I always kind of understood like the business part of the snowboarding, whereas a lot of other people didn't understand that. And they didn't go as far with sponsors and like getting money, being able to travel and stuff like that around the world. But for me, because I understood that and I was poor, I needed that portion to be able to help fund the rest of it, right? So one thing leads to another. You know, you meet one company, maybe a smaller company, and then, you know, you represent them for a couple of years, you do better, and then maybe like a bigger brand comes, and then at some point, like you just kind of get exposed to the biggest brands.
Yeah. I feel like that's such a young age to be such aware of like the business side of things. You know what I mean? Like, does that come from anywhere? Like your family, do they own businesses or?
No, not at all. I don't know. I was just kind of had it when I was a kid. Like I was like, I think like 7 or 8, I got like a paper route, and then like I kind of outsourced that to like my neighbor, and I was
already running a business.
I got the neighbor to like run, and then I got my other neighbor to run a couple routes, and I had like 4 or 5 routes with like kids down the street. But I think I was taking like 75% of the revenue.
That's cool. So you were just born with it, bro.
Yeah, then I had this like little business where like we'd plow driveways, like you know, rake leaves, like stuff like that, and it always just kind of like go after time. Then eventually it's just like snowballed into like bigger stuff, right?
I even read on Toronto Life you sold your Halloween candy to kids.
Yeah. So I used to keep my I got suspended for that actually, which is funny, which I think is crazy, right? Like they don't teach kids like entrepreneurialism and like they don't support that kind of stuff. So what I would do is I'd go out Halloween, take all my candy, I'd like, you know, just put a little aside for myself, and then I'd wait a month till all the kids ate the rest of their candy, and then I'd bring it to school, and then they had nothing left, so then I'd start shopping it at school.
That's jokes.
Yeah, you don't need much money back then, right? Like
No.
you make $5 a day, $10 a day, like you're happy as a kid,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Back then things were cheap. You go to Dollarama, you got 10 things back then.
Yeah, literally. So I guess with the snowboarding stuff, like did you get an injury? Is that when you had to stop with that?
Yeah, so snowboarding was cool. Like I took it as far as I could take it. So like, you know, I had some of the biggest sponsors in the world, was like traveling all over the place, competing. But I was good, but I was never going to be like the best, right? And I kind of realized that like at the top, maybe 10% of people in snowboarding could really make like a good career out of it. The other like 90% of people are always like playing catch up and like struggling and working in the off season and stuff like that. And if you want to be a professional athlete, like you can't be, you know, working as well too. You got to just be doing like whatever sport it is, you know, full time. Yeah. So when I was, I think 16 or 17, I graduated a year early in high school and actually decided to move to Whistler full time. So I was like 17. Yeah, it wasn't even legal, I don't think. I moved to Whistler and I ended up breaking my back.
Just like falling off.
Like, yeah, how'd that happen?
So it was this jump. It was like a 65 foot jump, and I just caught like a downhill wind, and it made me go way faster than I should have. And I ended up landing probably like 75, 80 feet on my tailbone, and it just like compressed my vertebrae. So I had, you know, a ruptured disc and screwed up some vertebrae damage there. And what I did was I ended up having to come home because I didn't want to be out there by myself, right?
Yeah.
So like you have your friends, your boys, but like you don't feel like you're at home, right? You're
Yeah.
kind of laying in a place by yourself that doesn't feel like home, you know. Even though you're still in Canada, it's far, right? It's equivalent of like Toronto to London or Europe.
Yeah.
So I came home, and then something kind of clicked when I was home, and I started to realize, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be out for 8 or 9 months, people are going to get so much better and further than me regressing because of my injury. Because when I come back, it's going to take me so much longer to get to where I was again from recovery. And then I need to play catch up where they all got during that time period. So it kind of started clicking me at that point. I'm like, okay, like maybe like chasing the, the Olympic dream and like going pro, like it's probably not realistic, right?
Mhm.
Or like making a lifelong career out of it.
Yeah.
Was that something that like weighed a lot on your heart? Like, did you go anything emotional? Like,
Yeah, that's a great question. And I only had clarity on that till recently. That was a very like tough point in my life, because I remember when I was in high school and I was dating this girl, my first like long-term girlfriend, and her dad sat me down one day, who's a super successful real estate guy. And he's like, so what are you going to do like if snowboarding doesn't work out? And like that was the first time in my mind it had ever clicked in my mind that snowboarding couldn't work out.
yeah,
Like I'd always been like, oh no, it's going to work out. Like I'd never ever thought of it. And like my parents and my like were, they raised us, but they didn't like provide any value to us, right? Like we're from my parents not only were like financially poor, but they were also poor on an education side, in a sense where like they didn't give us a lot of knowledge transfer on stuff. So like the conversations were like going to post-secondary school and like maybe considering university and stuff like that, like they were never even brought up.
wow,
So then snowboarding, I got to transition out of it, and I start panicking. I'm like, holy shit, like, so what do I do? All my friends are already in university, second, third year. Like what, I'm going to be like, go with a bunch of kids just out of high school and go to school or something? Like at that point, it didn't seem realistic.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man, what am I going to do next? Like I just felt so lost for a while.
Yeah.
And then something interesting ended up happening. So I was out at a bar with a buddy of mine, and we were watching a Leafs game or something. And my phone was dying, and I had a call from a new sponsor. It was like an energy drink company at the time. And I asked the lady there, I was like, hey, do you mind if I charge my phone? And she's like, no, we can't. Like, it's policy, this, that, whatever. So I had to take me and my buddies. Like, we didn't end up getting any food, and we went home because I had to charge my phone. I was like, man, that's stupid. The bar just lost probably like $200 just because I couldn't charge my phone. So I got this idea. I'm like, man, bars and restaurants should have like some sort of cell phone charging station for like places and like advertisements and stuff like that. And just being like, the way I am, like I hate sitting around doing nothing, and I was basically immobile. So I started looking at if there was something like that, cell phone charging stations for bars and restaurants, and there wasn't. So what I did was I went to a buddy's dad who was an electrical engineer, and I was like, hey, can we make like a prototype for something like this? And we ended up making this a charging station that we called Charge More, and it was like a battery powered cell phone charging station that had advertisements on it that you could sell to like bars, restaurants, nightclubs, like car dealership waiting areas, trade shows, whatever. And we took that little concept of it, and I'd watched tons of Dragon's Den and stuff like that when I was started. So it kind of like inspired me, right? I had the vision. And then we ended up raising $250K of seed capital for it in like 60 days. And then after that, I kind of went like full-fledged into it. Like once the seed was planted in my mind that snowboarding might not work, I was like, okay, like I need a plan B.
Yeah. How were you able to raise that much money?
It was a very interesting process. So my grandmother was, was a big influence in my life. Like she was a CEO of a big company as a woman, which was huge. She was a CEO of the company for I think like 40 years, from like the 70s, or no, maybe it was like late 70s into like mid 2000s.
Wow.
So it was like 25 or 30 years, and like there wasn't a lot of female CEOs back then. So she was very like strong and independent, like very business focused. Mm-hmm. So she kind of like gave me some guidance on like business plans and like maybe what to do. But the whole startup culture in Canada like 10, 15 years ago was pretty grim. Like it wasn't like it is now. So I ended up just making kind of like a pitch deck. And because I had an actual physical prototype, I feel like that opened a lot of doors, because people are like, okay, like it's not just someone talking about it. Like they kind of like have a bit of a team, like they can kind of put the whole thing together. Mm-hmm. And then from there on, we like actually started the company.
Yeah.
And it was like a pretty crazy journey from there for the next like 4 or 5 years, as I still was snowboarding, competing, but with the mindset of like I'm doing it more for like love and passion now, as opposed to like chasing like a career out of it type thing.
And how big did that company get?
Yeah, it's cool. So so it's interesting. So I'll walk you through the iteration of it. So I had this vision of being like a manufacturer. So I wanted to be the one to build a product. So we went to China when I was like 19, and I found an injection molding facility that was going to build the plastic parts. And then I found a robotics facility in Mississauga that made the circuit boards, and like we designed everything from scratch. Mm-hmm. And then we got a kind of like an industrial unit or whatever in Mississauga with some of our seed capital, and then we were doing assembly, marketing, the whole 9 yards from there. So I never went to post-secondary school, right? So you guys got to remember, like all my friends are in school, this, that, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I've got which at the time felt like a lot of money as a kid. I had like $250,000 and I'm running this company and I got employees and, going to China and like all this kind of crazy stuff. And the business started taking off. We started getting momentum. We're raising more money. We're getting more employees. Like things are going really good. And then one day, as we're like 2-3 years in, I get a call from my manufacturer in China. And he goes, listen, Jack, I want to tell you this first. We're going to rip your product off and we're going to start making exactly what you make, just differently. But I want to give you the exclusive rights to sell it first.
Whoa.
So he just stone cold just tells me, he's
Wow.
like, we're biting your product. We're going to steal all your IP, everything. There's nothing you can do about
How
it.
big
So
was the product? Sorry.
That's a big lesson to learn, but no, go ahead.
Like, how big was the product? Because, like, I want to,
Yeah. So they're about like, I don't know, think of it maybe like a 2-liter drink, like Pepsi bottle, maybe in half, like maybe that width type thing.
Okay.
So there's battery in it, and then it started off with just paper advertisement, and then we ended up putting digital screens on each side. So you could run like digital advertisements, videos, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So long story short, what ended up happening is this guy ended up sending us some of his product. And at first I was devastated. I was like, dude, like my, snowboarding and now the company's toast and whatever. Then I thought about it. I'm like, okay, let me send me the product. And he sends me the product with the cost of it. And he built a better product than I was building at a cheaper cost. And it was fully assembled when it came to me. So all of a sudden now my business goes from being like a manufacturing business, which is very complex, to just kind of like a distribution and marketing business, which we'd already kind of had some relationships with. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise, and ended up taking an investment from, think of it like a small private equity company in Oakville. So it was 4 guys that had put a bunch of money together that went to Cornell. So they all did their MBA at Cornell, and their end of career, call it 50s, 60s. And they were investing in a bunch of different startups. So I took a fair size investment from them, and they amalgamated a bunch of our businesses into this big facility in Oakville. So we had shared like accounting, shared picking and packing, shared customer service, some shared salespeople, all that kind of stuff.
And that connection, is that just because the reputation you had at that time? Like, or are you just blasting a bunch of like big like companies?
So same thing. It's kind of like snowboarding. It's kind of like the real estate industry. It's whatever, right? It's like you brand yourself and put your image out there, and then you try to make as many connections as possible. So that became possible because of a lead that I made with a guy at an accelerator center in Halton, which essentially means like a place. It's like an incubator. They help startups like get connections to stuff. So the guy introduced me to this guy who had another startup, and he was just giving me some advice. And then when we were talking about my numbers, it's like, hey, maybe like we'll actually take you on as like one of our first clients.
Mm-hmm.
So after a while, after a couple years, it ended up becoming interesting. The company evolved more so out of the charging station stuff into like more of a manufacturing company, and bridging some of our connections with China than it was originally about the charging stations. So after that, after having it for 4 or 5 years, we came to the point where there was a competitor in the US who I think had raised like $5 or $10 million in the time that I was trying to raise $1 million.
Wow.
And back then, like the equilibrium between Canada and the US was very far for raising money.
Yeah.
So we went out to go try to raise some money, and the initial thought on it was like, how much they wanted of equity in the company and this and that. Like it was going to be a bit of a struggle. So I had 2 options at that point, being 5 years in. It was either I sell my shares that I have to the other partners in the company, because they already have 80% of the infrastructure in their facility, right? Now it's more of like a marketing play and internet and, all the digital media and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or we go out and raise a bunch of money and fight a really big uphill battle for it. And I decided that the path for me was better to sell my shares to them and to kind of, move on and cash out that part of the business from it, because the business was never destined to be huge. And I always had this vision of, if I'm going to grow a business, I want to have something that's not capped and that I can indefinitely grow.
Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, what next?
Yeah. And how old are you at this time?
So I think I was 23. So I started, around 18 and then 23 now.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel imposter syndrome being around like all these older people and like you're so young?
Yeah, for sure. I think snowboarding, so snowboarding extreme sports, it's really funny because a lot of my friends that are at the same like point in life as me where they've kind of phased out of it, it gives really cool attributes that carry on very well into business. So if you're coming up to like a jump, right, and it's like a 50, 60 foot jump that you can potentially kill yourself on, like you need to have laser focus and just be able to overcome kind of whatever doubts that you have in yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to get broken off and get destroyed.
Yeah.
And then imagine if you hit that jump 150 times in a day and you do that 150 days in a year. So the repetition of like that kind of thing just really instills like a kind of self-confidence that you don't really get in a lot of other sports. So when you go in business and you're in situations like that where maybe people don't look at you the same because you're younger, you're kind of getting, people are making assumptions of you that you probably don't know what you don't know. And in reality, I didn't know, but at least I had the confidence to project that I could figure it out. And then because I could do that, then people gave me a chance.
And I know you didn't go to post-secondary school. So like, how are you learning? Are you on just like YouTube, Google, or, reading a lot of books?
It's funny. My grandma calls it like street school. Just like kind of
street smart, eh?
Just
I love that.
Everybody you can talk to that you think has some sort of information. Like, man, people love helping people out. And when you're a young kid at that age, like people will help you out because they know that you're getting started and you probably don't know what you need to know.
Yeah.
So I was never afraid to just pick up the phone and call people. Sometimes people would laugh, rejection, this, that, whatever. But like eventually someone will pick up and they will help you with it.
Yeah.
And every day I was doing that.
Yeah.
Like I was just calling people left, right, and center. But the one thing I really struggled with is like with that business is every day I woke up and I felt like I didn't have direction. Because it was me doing like sales. It was me, being the CEO. It was me raising money. Sometimes if someone didn't show up for a shift, it'd be like me assembling stuff or me doing this and that. So, later on building different businesses, I realized that you need to like focus on certain things and kind of only focus on revenue generating activity. And in the end, everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah. And when you cash out at 23, what are your next steps then? Like, what are you thinking at that point? Are you like, it's clearly not comfortable because you went on to build on a lot more things, right?
Yeah. So at that point, I had no clue what I wanted to do next. Snowboarding was like pretty much phased out. I was just doing it for fun at that point. Still had sponsors, but it wasn't what it was before. So one of my board members came to me one day and he took me to Starbucks in Oakville and he says, what were the best parts of your business that you liked? And I thought raising money and doing sales. Like I like presenting to people. I like having conversations, talking, that kind of stuff. And he goes, well, I have a startup downtown. He had raised like 50 or 55 million for called Scribble Live downtown. And he's like, why don't you just come see if you like doing sales for me? So I'm like, okay, like we'll try it. But this is the first time I've ever heard of like a real boss.
Yeah.
So I go downtown and I'm commuting and I just like hate the commute. It's like an hour and a half each way. Yeah. And I love the sales part, but I just didn't like the commuting and I didn't like the boss. Like I hated being in office every day.
Like you got to clock in at this time. Don't be late.
And you can't leave until this time.
Exactly. Yeah. So I remember in the winter, like I'd leave super early in the morning. It'd be dark. I'd go work all day. And then by the time I got home from my commute, it'd be dark again. It's like I didn't see sunlight for 6 months.
Damn.
So after a while, I said, okay, like I like sales. I just don't like necessarily sales here. So a good friend of mine introduced me to another tech startup and basically was like remote sales. So software sales, I always recommend to people now is like one of the best things that you can do if you're in your 20s and you want to make a lot of money without having to go through like a deep financial education. So I know tons of people in software sales within like 24 months that are making up to like 200K from just starting out in that industry. And I ended up working at this company for a couple years and I really, really liked it. But the one thing that I hated was I just hated having a boss. I hated someone like I hated the accountability and I don't know. I'll be the first to say like I'm a bad employee. I'm not a bad employee because like I won't do the work or I won't perform. It's just like I have this like entitlement where I feel like if I'm exceeding at my work, I should be able to kind of like run my own schedule.
Yeah.
And I was working for a Fortune, like pretty much 100, definitely 500, but at the time it was a Fortune 100 company. And like big corporate doesn't like that, right? Like you don't fit in the cookie cutter of that.
No, they hate the rebellion guy.
Yeah.
I remember I was working at TD and like I would fail compliance a couple times. So I'm like, okay, let me take this whole 8 hours to study compliance. So I didn't pick up no calls. I didn't call nobody. I was just studying compliance. And after that, she's like, Ricardo, you didn't do anything today. I'm like, yeah, like you told me I failed twice. Let me study it. You know what I mean? But like they hate that shit. They don't like that.
They do. They want you to play by the book. And like the problem is what I hate about it is like, if, as you said, like you could do your best and they still won't really look at it as your best. They'll just be like, you're just part of the cog in the wheel. Right. So.
For sure. And there's like some other things that like kind of like bug me, whereas like I'd work super hard on a deal and like there'd be a huge commission that was supposed to be attached to it. And then I would get the deal ripped out of my hands because like it would some like clerical error, like it would fall in someone else's territory last minute, or like they would realign comp plans or just stuff like that. And I kind of got fed up with it. And the one thing I realized through that whole process is I was super fortunate because of my startup experience, where I got put in a very senior position at a very big company, very young. So I was 25, and the average person that was on my team was like 30 to 50 type thing, right? So I was getting really good experience, and I got a job at a Fortune 100 company with no post-secondary. So people always say that's a big barrier, right? Well, I didn't go to college, this, that, whatever. It's like, if you have a story that you can share with people that can overcome why you didn't do it, like people can accept that. People can always make exceptions, but you just need to, you still got to do something with your life.
Yeah.
So at that point, what was the common denominator, right? That I noticed there. So all these older people that I was working with, they lived mediocre lives, but were making really good money. So I was like, well, where the hell, what are they doing with all their money? So they're all buying real estate with it. And they were all buying investment properties. They were all buying, you know, multifamily properties and Airbnb properties and all this. And just like in conversation, being with them every day, like it just started to rub off that like, okay, like this is definitely like a path that I want to go down.
Yeah.
And for me too, like, so the area I grew in was very, very interesting. I grew up in a poor pocket of a very, very wealthy area. So when I went to high school, a lot of the kids around me were from these super wealthy families, even though I wasn't. So I got to experience really cool things. Like, you know, when you go to like, let's say this guy Ryan's cottage or something, you're going to this like, you know, $5-10 million cottage, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like I'd never even seen, I didn't even know this existed.
Yeah.
And like the parents' car, they pick you up in like a Bentley or something.
Yeah.
And like, you know, just like experiences like that I was just super fortunate to get, even though I would have never been able to get it myself.
Yeah.
But the one thing I always remember when I was a kid was I always like, a little bit nosy in the sense where I'd always ask them like, oh, like, what do you guys do for work?
Yeah.
Like I was always curious about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of them would always tell me what they do, but they'd also tell me what they invest in. So it instilled two things. Number one, that they all invest, and that where they invest, the majority of them was in real estate. So they all had other, you know, real estate assets that they'd made a bunch of money on. So later in life, when I'd finally in a position where I have a bit of money saved up, then at that point, I had kind of been like, okay, real estate's probably the next journey for me.
Yeah.
But going back to something we talked about before, so I skipped upon one piece. When I was at the startup in the last 6 months of it, one of the business partners that I worked with was this guy named Greg Foss. So the guy right now is like a big Bitcoin influencer, like huge in the space. And he was a debt and bond trader for like 30 or 40 years at a hedge fund.
Oh, wow.
So he had a super successful like hedge fund career, and was probably one of the first like big like indirect mentors and like influences on me.
Yeah.
And this must have been 2015, 2016. No, probably 2015. He started taking part of my pay at ChargeMore, which was my startup, and buying Bitcoin with it.
Really?
Like for you, like to keep.
So he was like, man, there's this thing. He's like, I really believe in it. So because he was a debt trader and he was a fiat trader for a long time, like he really understood like global currency markets and like devaluation of currencies, things like that. So he was a big proponent of it. And Coinbase, I think it just launched, and he was the maximum you could buy in Canada at the time was I think like $250 like every 3 days. So he was just maxing it out, and part of my pay would go to it. And I was like, okay, you know, I have a bit of disposable income, like whatever. This guy's super smart. Like, let me just go with it. And I think I turned like $6,000 in like $195,000 in like 3 months or something.
Damn.
And then the funniest thing was I had to go to China again, and I thought I put a like a sell order on or a stop sell order on.
Yeah.
And I ended up like hitting the wrong button or something, and ended up selling by accident. I didn't realize it. And I went to bed and I woke up and I lost like $60,000. And I remember just sitting there that day, and it was just like a hit the wrong button type thing.
Yeah.
And I was just devastated, bro, because that amount of money to me was like my world at that point. So long story short, when sold my shares, had a bit of money from that, and then combined with some of the commissions from my new employment at this tech startup, I was like, okay, I got to buy my first place.
Yeah.
So one of my like best friends, she's like, okay, go look at these kind of places. Let's try to find you somewhere that you can do this thing called house hacking. So I was like, okay, like what's that? Like it sounds cool, but I don't really know what it is. So essentially she was like, what we're going to do is find you a property that you can live in one portion of it. We'll separate and put another rental unit in it. And then it'll basically help you carry the cost of the house. So I was like 24, 25. And I was like, no financial background. Like parents were there supporting me. Like if I didn't make it happen, probably just default, right? So I was scared shitless about owning a home.
Yeah.
So I got the place. They all convinced me. Everybody was like super supportive. Buy this place, spend every dollar I have, like doing the renovations, do everything completely wrong, like huge learning curve. And then I get my first tenant. And my first tenant was one of my employees that I had at my startup. And I was super nervous about that whole point because I was like, man, like landlord tenant board, like I kind of knew all the stuff that was going on. It's super difficult. And my tenant came out to me and he said something interesting. He's like, listen, you want like 21 or 2200 for the unit. I think it was 2200. He's like, I'll give you $2,000, but I'll give it to you upfront cash for the entire year. And I thought about it. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why don't you just pay month to month? And he's like, well, the return on the market that I can get, this is a guaranteed return on my money if I just give it to you on the savings and reduction of the payment. And I thought about it. I'm like, okay, it makes sense, right? But I never forget that day changed my life. I remember he literally brought me a brick like 24,000 in cash. Yeah. I just remember being like 24, 25 and be like, fuck man, real estate's the best.
Yeah. Damn, that's crazy though. Where was that reverse psychology though, you know what I mean? Where he's like, I'm actually saving more money by doing this.
It's kind of crazy to think that too, that he had that like mindset too, right? To just all in at the beginning and then the savings will pick back up at later on, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I learned later is it's called the time value of money, right? So is the money better to have it now or is it better to have it in the future? And, it made sense for him to kind of put the money up now.
Yeah.
Where was his first property? Was it?
In Oakville.
Okay.
So that was 2017-ish. And at that moment though, like when I say my life changed, I mean like my life really changed. Like I knew I was like, okay, real estate is the path for me. When I was at my corporate job, I was always just thinking like, what's my next business? Like I cannot wait to leave. What is my next business?
Yeah.
And then from that moment on, I just went on this like crusade to educate myself and to figure out, okay, how can I get another property? And just remember in 2017, I was blessing and a curse. That was the last correction before the correction that we're in now. And that was the stress test when the government introduced that on the mortgage rates. So the market cooled off real quick. So I started, luckily now in reflection, my investing journey in a full correction. So, when I went through, now when we talk about like me building my next business, I was much more cautious on how I did it because I'd seen what a correction had looked like. Whereas I have some friends and people I know now that are kind of going through this one and didn't go through that before. So they're in a bit more hot water and trouble, right? With rising rates and things like that.
Yeah, like you started off in a hot environment.
Hot environment that just hit a wall and crashed. Like one day the government said, okay, we have these new policies. And just literally next day the market started crashing.
Yeah. Damn.
But because that taught me a lot of lessons about the real estate market and how it's a cyclical market, right? So you can make money on the ups and the downs. In the end, you should never try to time real estate or any investment. But if you can come somewhere close to the top and somewhere close to the bottom, you can do really good and accelerate the growth.
Yeah. And right now, what would you say we're in this economy right now?
I would say things are going to get better before they get worse. Like, I was telling you guys before, right? I have a client of mine, without saying names or anything, they're both professionals. So one's a doctor and one works in finance. They have a combined income of around like 400 to 450,000. They're early 30s, late 20s. And it almost broke my heart to hear when I was meeting with them that like their first house they can only afford is a townhouse living in the city. Like if you go to med school, you're providing like services for people in the city. Like, you go through finance and all the hardships that like it costs to get there and the sacrifices you have to make. And you want to start a young family and you can only afford a townhouse, like something's broken.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
But on another aspect, I have like another way that I look at it too. And I fight with this process in my mind sometimes. So look at London, look at Shanghai, look at Paris, New York, LA, all these places. So about 50, 60 years ago, all these cities went through this transition where people started getting brought up with the expectation of never owning and just renting their whole life. And now here we are like 2 generations after that, 3 generations. And people grow up in these cities and they never, ever expect to own. Right? So think about Toronto. Like Canada's one of the top 10 countries in the world. We're G8. And we're in the number 1 city in one of the best countries in the world. Like it's probably a natural progression where Canada and Vancouver will get to the point where people only ever rent in their life and they don't own. Which is unfortunate, but it just seems like the way that the world's gone, right? If you base it on other major cities.
That's crazy. That's a really good insight on that. I never thought about it like that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's crazy to think just that as a comparison because everything just seems to follow through, right? Like history repeats itself almost in a way.
Yeah. And like, think of immigration here, and like, you know, the Canadian government right now is letting in more people than Texas and Florida have immigrated in the past 2 years combined. And like in the United States, there's a lot of immigration going to those states. So it's very interesting, but being in real estate, it probably affects our industry the most out of anything, because it just makes the supply and demand balance so much greater.
Yeah.
So we as landlords and, you know, having real estate businesses have kind of like a moral obligation to like help provide housing and good housing. But it's hard because like we have these like golden handcuffs that are essentially given to us by the government, whereas we can only grow so much now, and they're really fighting on having people on multiple properties. Where in the end, like people like you and me and ourselves and like people in our network, like we go and we buy these so-called shithole houses, dump tons of hard-earned money that, you know, we get, and then take huge risk on renovating them and bringing them back up to market in gentrifying areas, which then we go put families in, right? And we create more housing demand. We add units, all this kind of stuff. But the media's like turn the narrative where essentially like we're the enemy, we're part of the problem, not the solution. Whereas in reality, like we're the only people right now that are essentially helping, you know, the solution. It's just us and builders.
Yeah.
And like builders are getting penalized just as much as we are, to the point where, you know, I don't want to use the socialism word, but like so far that Canada like kind of dangles the carrot in front of you, right? So like they always sell like the Canadian dream, and there's the carrot there. And once you get the carrot, they just pull it a little bit further. And it's like they want you to always chase this dream, but then each time they pull the carrot is like legislation or it's new taxes.
Yeah.
And then people who have good intentions of like doing this kind of stuff in real estate and building these businesses to provide really nice housing for people, they just get knocked down to the point where people are, a lot of them starting to switch strategies now, going to short-term rentals and going to larger multifamily and commercial assets and things like that.
It's crazy you say that, because I remember like my dad, as an immigrant to this country from El Salvador, he said the exact same thing. He's like, you know, Canada's beautiful, you know, it's a lot better than where I was from, but it feels like they're dangling a carrot in front of you. Like you just gotta work, and then you'll get, but like they'll never let you get too far ahead. You know what I mean? It's really hard to get too far ahead. So that's an interesting like perspective there too.
Yeah, you just got to keep fighting it. And like, you know, you do get further ahead. It's just, I don't know, like maybe it's me being hypocritical. Like every business is different, has its own challenges, right? But I feel like right now, landlords and like people, real estate investors are like being probably more scrutinized than they ever have, I would say.
Yeah.
And when we look at the problems like people are facing, like look at the two, you know, political candidates right now and stuff, like Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau. Like the biggest battle they got going on right now is housing. Every day you see them both like posting stuff about it. Yet when we look at what the government's doing to like incentivize people that are actually like boots on the ground making this happen, like they're just making it so much more difficult.
Yeah, so it's hypocritical.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's crazy.
I think, yeah, it's I don't know. I think even to Canada's just kind of gone down overall. It's like it used to be like that place you wanted to go, and now it doesn't feel like that anymore.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next like kind of decade or two, right? Like in the end, people are resilient, right? Like governments change, policy changes, this, whatever. So, you know, it doesn't mean that where we are now won't end up better in the future, but I agree that the trajectory right now, unless changed, isn't very promising.
But as an investor, I could see how it's promising, because what you said earlier is like now is the time to invest in Canada, because it's going to be soon like those like London, England, right? Like Los Angeles, where like people just have that mentality. You know what? We're not going to own. We're going to rent here. So it's now is the time to get in a way, right?
Yeah, and it's hard. So like, you know, we haven't really talked about kind of like my new business yet, or like kind of what I do in real estate. But, you know, part of one of my businesses, I have a coaching business, which, you know, you're familiar with, and I help essentially, you know, people of all ages try to build a real estate portfolio and quit their corporate job and use real estate as their sole income. Mm-hmm. And what I did in the journey that I followed and people before me, I find it's harder and harder to teach the same thing because of government intervention. So like governments recently forced banks to cut down people's home equity lines of credits to basically help like the common person from over leveraging. And then they're making it harder for people to qualify for loans. They're making it, you know, they're really trying to force it so that individuals can own multiple properties. So, you know, I get it that like they feel like there's a proportion of the population that kind of has a majority. But, you know, as Warren Buffett said, if you had 1,000 people of all different backgrounds, all different mindsets, everything, the people who were rich before are probably going to end up rich again if you just gave everybody, you know, the same playing field.
Yeah.
the biggest issue that I see with Canada now is just people being lazy. Like people just not having the ambition and like feeling like the drive to really go and get it right.
Yeah.
You know, I have a bunch of friends that kind of came from nothing and have kind of made something of themselves, you know, me being one of them. And I still think it's completely possible. You just might have to work a little bit harder at it.
Yeah. And I guess what are the new business ventures that you're doing now?
Yes, I got a couple things. So like everything for me ties into one thing, right? So long-term asset accumulation, you know, what I see in a long-term is where people make the most money. So buying great assets or great businesses and just owning them for a long time. So for me, my real estate portfolio is my baby, and think of like everything I do in a funnel. So I have a real estate coaching business where I help people try to follow the same journey that I did. So, you know, in 5 years, I basically built like an $11 million real estate portfolio from scratch. I've kind of got like a corporate coaching program with a business partner where we do some stuff with his coaching program. And then I'm a realtor, so I focus on helping people with investment properties specifically and handhold them through the process. Now, recently, we started focusing on buying apartment buildings for people. And then probably the coolest thing that I'm doing is I started working with some partners, these guys that started this fund. So it's called Peak Multifamily. And, you know, they're kind of on a journey to buy like a couple $100 million worth of real estate and multifamily assets. And the way they've structured is really cool. And how we're working together is on basically bringing retail investors and people that wouldn't typically get access to these kind of higher return funds and giving them access to these deals, right? So it's kind of cool. Like you can bring your friends along the journey with you, give them a piece of the pie. You know, they invest in the projects too, and then we can go buy these big buildings to give great long-term returns. And, you know, bring your friends along the journey, which is incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, literally all focused around real estate, becoming that expert on real estate in all assets, like all facets. So.
How'd you end up finding out about like this specifically? Was it just long-term research? Somebody showed you, or
real estate?
Yeah, or no, like sorry, just like the apartment, like that.
Peak,
yeah, the peak.
The fund.
Yeah.
So long story short, like I'd kind of known the guys, like they had a successful podcast on the real estate side, and always had them like top of mind. And then I ended up joining the same brokerage that they were at, and it just kind of made sense. I approached them, just said like, hey, how can I add value to you guys, right? Like, love to donate some time and just like be involved in the process and try to learn from like that next level of real estate investing. You know, being a residential investor and building a portfolio of properties that are 1 to 4 units, you can only scale that so big efficiently. At some point, you need to go into the bigger stuff to turn it into like an actual large business. So what do? There's 2 ways of mentorship, right? There's unpaid mentorship and then there's paid mentorship. So first you always explore unpaid mentorship because it's just cheaper, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, it ended up being a great synergy. So Mike Rockall and I, who, you know, we work with on the broker side, he's a principal and one of the founding partners of the fund. So him and I basically buy and sell apartment buildings and then try to match those up with people. But what we also do is we try to find the best deals for the fund and then bring those deals into the fund. And then we kind of like a third business where we buy deals outside of the fund and we bring on, you know, maybe more higher net worth individuals. And then we go take down individual buildings with maybe a couple partners. Okay. So everything that we do at all of my businesses essentially revolve around real estate that tie into just me buying more assets long-term, right? And we've talked about this before. The beautiful thing about real estate is it creates a pillow for you to sleep under. And when you have a family, you know, whether you've been rich, you know, everybody's rich, poor, whatever, or you're going through something, like everybody's kind of felt like an insecurity in their life, right? And holding real estate assets gives you like the ability to sleep at night, knowing that like there's a financial foundation that you can fall back on. So me with the background of growing up with no money, being poor, like, you know, financial insecurity was always a big thing I grew up with, right? So real estate kind of took that and alleviated that off my shoulders. And that's like why I love teaching it and helping other people with it.
So would you say right now, like real estate's your passion? Like you love it. Like that's one thing you're going to be building for a long time.
For sure. 100%. Yeah. Like I invest in other businesses too. So like I invested in like a livestock business that produces really good cash flow. A laundromat, you know, I'm just about to invest in a friend's hospitality venture downtown.
Cool.
Done a bunch of other businesses. So I do still like kind of like that venture play, but I would say like 75% of the investing that I do is on the real estate channel.
Yeah.
Could you see yourself doing anything else, you think, at this point?
Nah, you know, I love it. I'm a big proponent of telling people to quit their job and chase their passions. but I also like to caution people on what the downsides of that are, right? So when you work for yourself and you run your own business, you probably end up working twice as much as you would when you had like a corporate job, right? Like at the 9 to 5, it doesn't just stop. But it's so much more satisfying when all you do is you work knowing that you are the sole benefactor, or your family or your friends or whatever your partners is, and that you're growing something, right? Like I find people who are really successful don't get driven by the money. They more so get driven by setting hard challenges and overcoming them, right? So taking on like a hard challenge, like a hard business, and like figuring out ways to do it. And success most of the time that I see is like a combination of a million different small challenges overcome than it is necessarily usually one big thing, right? So people just grinding every day, doing different things, overcoming stuff. And it's probably pretty similar, I would say, in most businesses.
Yeah.
Just why I like real estate is I think it's a simple business. It revolves three things: debt, the asset, and management. So,
simple, yeah.
Easier said than done, obviously. But in reality, when you put it like that, there's only really three components, and maybe some construction and other stuff. But it kind of falls under management or operations.
How do you keep yourself grounded with so much you got going on?
So that was something I really struggled with until about 6 months ago, where one of my friends kind of sat me down and we charted out all my businesses together. And he's like, I just don't think this is sustainable for you to like grow anymore. He's like, you need to either hire or you need to drop a business. So like make a decision, right? And I decided to hire. So, I hired a personal assistant, and now I'm hiring some admin people. And then fortunately, my wonderful personal assistant just went back to school, which we've discussed. But, shout out to anybody that's interested in working for me. But yeah, I think it's a combination. At some point, you just have to hire.
Yeah.
Like you can only do so much by yourself before you start killing yourself.
Yeah.
Or you sacrifice relationships, right?
Yeah.
True. So like outsourcing is a big thing that you're kind of focusing on now?
I'd say insourcing more so. So bringing people into my circle, educating them, and trying to incentivize them, get them to think the way I do, right? But the hard part, and I finally realized this after having a couple businesses of hiring, is finding people, especially in real estate, that think the same way you do. And I talk to students like this all the time. People know it, and not a lot of people talk about it, but like 1% of people in the world have all the wealth and have all the power, right? And if you aspire in your life to be exceptional and try to have a chunk of the power and a chunk of the money, then you need to think differently than the general population. So that means as you're going down the journey, 99% of people that you meet are never going to look at the world the same way you do, right? If you want to live in that 1% mentality. So when they say it's a lonely road to the top, it kind of is in a sense, whereas like you rejig friendships and relationships and stuff like that, and you try to find like-minded people to go on that journey. Because when you're going through it, if you have that 1% mentality, that means most people will never see the world the same way you do. And they won't understand why you're doing things until you've actually done them. So that's when we go back to talking about like hiring and stuff like that. It's hard to find people that have the same vision, the same passion for it that you do. But when you do find someone, it's like do everything you can to keep them.
Yeah. Have you found your friendship circles have changed then because of that?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely some people that like kind of resented the journey, right? Like I had an interesting thing happen. I had a bunch of people over like 6-7 months ago or something, and there was like two friend groups, right? Kind of like a friend group from the past that we still keep in touch with, and kind of like the newer friend group of we all hung out together, but like everybody kind of went left and right in their life, right? And the old friend group, one of the guys said he was looking inside, and he kind of just like, man, he's like, it's just crazy. He's like, your friend group, you guys all just do everything you can to help each other. Whereas in our friend group, we all want each other to do good, just not better than us. Right? So basically what he was saying is that like they all want each other to succeed, but they don't want anybody to do better than how they are. Yeah. And because of that, they'll keep each other down. And I think they've seen the compounding effect of we've all known each other for like 10 years, and we're in such a different place than they are. And I think it's kind of been like a mental realization to them that like you just can't go through life like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the saying that you hear everywhere, bro. It's like the people you hang around with them for so long, you're gonna become like them. And like that's like true. It's so true. You know what I mean? Like when you're a little kid, like between 16 to 22, you probably don't think about those things, but then you reflect as you get older and you realize, yeah, damn, like the people I was around like did influence every choice I made, right? So yeah, it's more important now like than ever to make those connections, and it's hard to give away old friendships. It is. It is, but you got to. You know what I mean? You only have one life.
I feel like there's a perfect balance almost in a way. Because remember, even Claude said it when we were talking about it last time. She said like she still chills with like all her old friends, but kind of separates like the conversations where it's like there's some people you can have the conversations about like trying to build yourself, and others you kind of have to walk away from it because they just don't get you.
And that's the thing when we're going back to the 99 and the 1% thing, right? It's like everybody has the option to try to live the 1% lifestyle and like work towards that dream. But most people just don't want to put the time and effort to, right? Yeah. And I get that. Like, I don't put anybody down for that. It's just like, I feel like I want to do something different with my life. And when you get to the point where you have so much going on and you already have such a big network of people, relationships you got to maintain, at some point, something's got to give, right? So then what you do is, you know, maybe you divert less time to certain people and you double down on people you really care about. Yeah. And that's kind of the way I've looked at it, right?
Yeah. I guess, what's your why? What keeps you going?
I think about that all the time. And it's funny because I ask students that, right? And like, sometimes, and then sometimes when I'm asking them that, I'm like, what's your why? Like, why real estate and this and that? But I think about it more like philosophically on like a whole bigger level, right? Yeah. You know, I think the things that are most important to me as I start, you know, coming into my 30s is having quality time with people I care about, right? So it's not necessarily what I do, it's who I'm doing it with, right? And I think that money doesn't make you happy, but what it does is it amplifies certain situations that can make you happier. Yeah. So like a lot of my friends live around the world now, or they've moved to the US, or they're in different places. And me being in a fortunate situation where I can go see them a lot, like that makes me really happy because those are the people that make me feel like home, right? People I grew up with, people I've had long-term relationships. And I think when you find good people, just like stick with those people and invest in them as much as they invest in you.
Yeah. Has your why changed over the years from like when you first started real estate to where it is now?
Yeah, I think absolutely. My why originally was just like try to find something stable that I can just like do my own thing, right? So I just wanted to buy my freedom. And one of the things I teach people in my coaching program is essentially like the time value of your life and the time value in your early 20s and early 30s and being able to maximize that, but also buying your freedom back, right? I find that my why changed kind of between 20s to 25. Then I had another evolution of like 25 to 30. And then now being in my 30s, like you start getting older, people start having families and you start to like maybe think that, okay, you know, life soon is not going to be about me anymore. So like, how can I position myself in the decisions I make now to help better my family's future so that they don't grow up the same way I did?
Yeah. So that's something you do plan, is like to have a family in the future and go along that route?
Yeah, 100%. Like, you know, when it comes or when it happens, you know, that'll kind of dictate its own self. But I think it's one of those things, just keep moving forward every day, right? Yeah. Like those kind of things will sort itself out and they'll all come. But if you just build structure and you build purpose in your life, that's what matters. Yeah. So I guess another part of my new why now is just having purpose, right? Like I wake up every day. I know what I'm supposed to do in my job. Like, it's not like my startup where I felt like I was lost some days. Like, I know exactly what I do. I got purpose. I've got goals, all that kind of stuff. And it's very fulfilling to know that, like, I'm chasing them, I'm hitting them, and moving through different milestones. But most importantly, I'm getting to do it with a lot of people that I love doing it with.
Yeah. Do you have, like, a certain target in your head where you're like, I need to hit this before anything? Like, you know what I mean?
I've always, like, everything I try to just do it, like, maybe not been number one at everything I do, but at least like compete at the highest level, right? Mm-hmm. So everything I want to do, I'd want to compete at the highest level. So even with real estate, I want to get to the point where I can compete with like the big boys. Yeah. You know, with snowboarding, with other sports that I've done, with other business and investing endeavors, with, you know, personal things and other hobbies I have. It's always the goal to like compete at the highest level. Yeah. For me, at the highest level, do I need to be number one? Like, I'm very competitive, but like, it's not a need for me. I just want to know that like I'm playing the hardest game. Yeah. Like
you're leaving it all out there.
Yeah.
Right. Fuck, I don't want to play Monopoly against Jack. Right. I feel like he's a serious board gamer with that.
Yeah. Life's been interesting, but like, it's funny how like it evolves through your 20s and you go in your 30s. And like, when you look at businesses and relationships and friendships, like, and you look at everything from a 5,000 foot overview, it's like, if all cylinders are running well, it's like you have a beautiful life, but like you need to have all cylinders still moving, right? Like you can't have bad relationships but lots of money, or good relationships and no money, or no future, you know, or nothing down the pipeline, right? Yeah. So like when you got all the things moving, it creates like a beautiful balance of life and you get to enjoy yourself.
Yeah. It takes a long time to build, right? And it's a lot of mindset too. Like I'm sure you went through a lot of failures, or like not failures, but like lessons, right, throughout your life. Like, can you tell us like a time where like you thought it was all over? Where you're like, hey, fuck, like what did I do now? And how you overcame it.
Yeah, so snowboarding was like that every single day. It was like snowboarding is probably one of the hardest mental battles you can go through, because every single run on every single feature, you have to like fight for yourself to have 100% confidence and 100% commitment on whatever you're doing. And if you have anything less than that, you're going to get hurt or something's going to happen. And you just have days when you're off, right? And you would just have like, injury or this or that. And it puts you in a hole because you have one day where you fall, you kind of get hurt. Then you're off for 2 weeks, you come back, you're not feeling sharp again. And then you might have a bad day getting back because you're still getting unit. And then 2-3 months go by and you're like, man, like I'm in a rut.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is being able to pull yourself out of that.
Yeah.
So for me, being able to pull myself out of it has always been like a mental battle for myself that I feel like I've been pretty good at, of being able to like compartmentalize things and say like, hey, I want to be a winner, so I got to just push through it. Kind of like the like Navy SEAL mindset of like, the only easy day was yesterday.
Yeah.
David Goggins style.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So I'm okay with challenge. I'm okay with hard work. I just need to know that the outcome's going to be worth it. Like the juice is worth the squeeze. Like, I'll do anything as long as I know that the outcome's worth it. Yeah, it's kind of the way I look at my life.
Yeah.
Do you still snowboard now? Like,
yeah.
Is there any other sports you like kind of put your attention to now, just because like if you can't snowboard all the time?
My newfound passion, honestly, I think is running. I like running because it clears my mind and it allows me to kind of get in a zone and keep pushing myself, right? Like you can indefinitely run and just keep going, but running is exactly like snowboarding in the sense that it's a mental challenge. So I had a buddy who was like hungover as shit like 3 or 4 years ago. Like he went out the night before, never even trained, and the guy ran a full marathon.
What?
Those guys are different.
Yeah, literally.
But it's just a mental battle. He was there and he was just like, so it was funny because I was like, how did you do that? Like, what were you thinking the whole time? Because at that point I'd be thinking like, every step is a battle, right? And he was like, man, I was so just focused on how hungover it was that I just kept running.
That's crazy though, man. Like it is a mindset. Like we ran a half marathon last year. David Coca and I, and like, yeah, like after like 15K, you're like, wait, is my ankle hurting? Is it hurting? Like it really does hurt now. But then like once you're like at 17K, you don't even think about the ankle anymore, right? So it's kind of crazy how your mind can make you think anything. Right?
I always found too, your body will feel like it's giving out, but it won't give out before your mind when you're running. It's like you just got to keep going. You got to think about something else even too. It's like I can't be a failure almost in a way. So you just keep running.
Yeah, 100%. You just keep pushing yourself.
Do you plan to run a half marathon or a marathon, or have you ever thought about it?
Yeah. I'm going to run a marathon in the fall. I think I booked a 10K next week on the island.
Oh,
nice.
Which is fun, right? It's just kind of like a cool place to run.
Yeah.
Toronto Island. But now my biggest battle is like time management, right? So it's like I know that physical exercise is like an extreme priority for like mental health and everything. But then I'm also, working like 60, 70 hours a week, 7 days a week. So it's like I got to build the business and get people in line and manage so that I can offload stuff on my schedule while increasing my earnings per hour. So I still want to make the same amount of money. I just want to work less, right?
Yeah.
And then being able to prioritize stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you time manage all this? Because it seems like you got a lot going on. Is there like time blocks you're doing? Are you like, is your phone constantly letting you know what you have to do? Or
I would say I'm like, not OCD, but like extremely organized. Like everything's like time blocked. Like everything's in a schedule. Like I'm a task orientated. So I run lists for a bunch of different things. And most importantly, like I hold myself accountable for the things that I put on that list. So it's almost like, think of it like a Bible for me. When I write like my to-do for the day, if it's going on that piece of paper, like it will get done. And I find that, I work hard. Maybe I work like 20% harder than another person who works hard, but that 20%, or maybe if it's even 10% per day, because that compounds over time, I end up getting a lot more done than a lot of other people. And it's just like a little bit more effort. Like it's like working out, right? Yeah. The last like couple pumps are the ones that make all the difference. Or like, if you're going to do a rep of 12, do 14. The last 2 are going to do way more than the 12 probably did.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing that I look at with like work ethic and getting stuff done. It's the last little bit of effort with everything that you put in that like brings you across the line and kind of makes a difference.
Yeah. It's that discipline.
Yeah.
That discipline and consistency. If you do that every single day, then you're used to that. And then the next year, you're probably going to put 12%, and you're just compounding more and more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you always end up like, people typically underachieve, or I can't remember what it is. It's like overachieve in a year, but underachieve in a quarter, or whatever it is, like on goal setting. It's kind of the same thing, right? Like I'm big on goal setting and big on kind of setting like barriers and metrics and stuff like that. And it's just holding myself accountable, because one thing I learned in this life is like, if it's made to be, it's up to me, right?
Yeah.
So no one else is going to like come pick up the pieces. No one else is going to make it happen for me. So I just got to do it. And once I really learned that internally, then it was so much easier for me to work hard, because I realized that like, okay, if no one else is going to pick up the pieces and do it, then I got to do it. So just don't be bitter about it.
Yeah.
Remember we spoke earlier about traveling. Like, do you find traveling is a big thing for you, like mindset wise, or even to just like to kind of relieve yourself?
For me, that's like the escape, right? So I think I've been to 52 countries now.
Yeah.
And snowboarding is really cool. Like I got to travel all over the place for like 8 or 9 months of the year, right? Sometimes 10 months. But for me, that's my release. So I try to go on a trip like every other month somewhere around the world, or, you know, some sort of cool trip. And that's my release, where it's like, okay, the juice is worth the squeeze, right? I worked this hard. I did this. Now I'm going to go see this person and enjoy this moment with that person. Yeah. And those are the trips necessarily aren't like the satisfaction I get. It's like spending the time with certain people and like doing cool experiences with them. And that's the stuff you remember, right? Like you don't remember the small things about the trip. It's like, hey, I did this really cool thing with that person. And like it ingrains that memory with that person. And that's going back to the why. Like it all ties into the same thing, right? So it's my release and it's my why.
How important is it for you to see like those different perspectives, like in different countries?
It's cool, man. Like the world's a very different place. Like when you travel the world and you see like places in like the Middle East and in Asia and in like South America, and like how people live, and most importantly, like how they look at the world, it gives you a new perspective on like how, it's hard to say, but like how like the West like has kind of become weak in a sense. Like they look at the world differently, and like people are a lot tougher and manage and carry themselves in like completely different demeanors in other countries. And I think that's why we're starting to see problems in the West, right? Where people are lazy. They don't want to work. They don't have a backbone. They don't stand up for themselves. Like there's a very small part of the population that has the loudest voice that overshadows the rest of the population in many different aspects of things.
Yeah.
And like the rest of the world has their own problems. We have our own benefits, but it's interesting to see that and to come back and try to think like, okay, so the good I saw in the rest of the world, how do I try to like make a difference in Canada to bring some of the good back without bringing the bad?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And in reality, it's a big question. Like no one knows how to answer it, right?
What are your thoughts on like BRIC, right? Like the like do you see like kind of the West now taking that submissive role, and then all of a sudden like other parts of the world taking over, like in the future?
Yeah, globalism is a weird concept, right? Especially how it's evolving now. So if you look at the book Ray Dalio made called Changing World Order that came out like a year ago, pretty much everything that he talked about on how the dynamic of a dynasty changes and where we are in the curve. So let's just base it off America, because America runs the most of our economy, North America and everything else. Like it's on an absolute economic decline as a nation. And in history, like a nation that's in decline or a powerhouse like that has never really been able to right the ship. But the world's also changed so much. So like, I don't know if it's going to be as cyclical as it was before. Like, I don't know if China will be the sole kind of superpower and then America will subside, or Russia or whoever, or it'll just be a bunch of people with a lot of different pull in different places.
Yeah, interesting. I guess technology changes everything, right? Like America has a lot of money with like the AI and like stuff that they're putting with like Meta, and they have a big influence on that side of things.
Well, and that's what's hard for me to see, right? So talking about the middle class, right? The rest of the world is catching up on the middle class, and the middle class is getting more opportunity, and quality of life for the average person in a lot of different countries is improving overall. But when we look at Canada, typically the middle class is the one that's getting hurt the most, right? Yeah. So how do we make it so that it's fair? Because there's a lot of immigrants coming. I talk to them all the time in the real estate business, and they're like, man, we came here and it just wasn't what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So how do we make it that it's fair for everybody, right? Because, you know, I'm a capitalist at heart. So like, you know, I have my path and my beliefs, but at the same time, it shouldn't be so bad that like, you know, you're either rich or you're poor. Like there's got to be something in between where like everybody can have some commonality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And when you travel the world, you see so many different perspectives of like how that balance works.
Yeah.
And people being happy, right? That's one thing I noticed is like certain countries, a lot of happy people, and there's not a lot of happy people in other countries.
Yeah.
And some of the best times of my life where I've had the most fulfillment was when I was the poorest, like living in Whistler with friends and like snowboarding. Like I had no money, nothing, but I had purpose and I had drive. And I feel like anybody with purpose is going to do good things in life.
Yeah. No, but that's crazy because I remember we went to Amsterdam and you didn't see one homeless person, you didn't see one obese person. Like there's some different places out there. Bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were shocked.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is there any place that you would opt to go to other than, like, let's say the U.S. or Canada?
To move?
Yeah.
Probably like what everybody else is doing is going to Dubai just because of like how
Taxes.
economically friendly it is, right? And when you look at geographically where Dubai is, like it's not like you can get to Europe pretty quick, you can get to everywhere else pretty quick. Like it's not the best location, but it's not terrible either, geographically speaking. There's a lot of uncertainty everywhere. Right? Like Europe's very uncertain. There's obviously the war going on right now and a bunch of other stuff. But, you know, as much as we talk about it, like, I still can't complain. Like, I live a good life. I've made it for myself here. And I've done it as of, like, within the past 10 years. So I still think there is opportunity here for people. They just need to be much more, like, crafty on how they do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And pick what they do. Because there's certain industries that I think are going to get hit much harder politically.
Yeah.
So the first question was around your back injury. So obviously that came with a lengthy recovery time. We've had stories on here in the past about like what that's done to your mental and how to like overcome that. What can you walk us through that period in your life and then how that correlated to like how you handle business nowadays?
Yeah, for sure. It's weird. I've always had this like pretty big ability to like block out certain weaknesses and stuff like that from injuries, right? So a lot of people struggle with getting an injury, and then like the mental downside of that is like, okay, how do I recover? Or being scared to go back to the sport because the sport injured them. I never really had that. Like it was weird. I broke 32 bones during my snowboarding career, multiple different things, multiple surgeries, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I would ever think of when I broke something was like, I'd ask the doctor when I'm there, like still like the finger would be like down like this, the wrist would be like this, would be like, oh, like when can I start snowboarding again? Yeah. That would always be the first thing I asked. Yeah. And I remember my grandma always, every injury would be like, are you done yet? Like, is snowboarding done? Just hoping I'd hang up the towel. Yeah. And I'd be like, why do you ask that? Like, I would get so frustrated. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized I was like, yeah, like it's not normal for people to not be demotivated by that. I never ever had that when I got an injury where the first thing I thought of wasn't going back to go snowboarding.
Even with your back, you were just like,
even with my back,
this is gonna pass. We're going to get back on the board, and like I know you said there was a bit of a shift that like you're like, oh, I need to start thinking business, but you were just kind of like right away like, okay, like recovery and we're getting back on this sort of thing.
Yeah, that was the first thing that I thought. I think the one mental downside that I struggled with wasn't necessarily to do with the injury, but it was more so like opening my eyes up to, okay, what if not snowboarding? Mm-hmm. Okay. And it was the weirdest thing ever. Like I'd gone through my whole life with 100% certainty that it was going to work out, mm-hmm. which obviously you shouldn't do. Yeah. But because of that, it gave me like an unfound confidence in like moving forward with it, right? Because I had nothing else to fall back on. Yeah. Right. So I just went 10 times harder at it than most people would. Yeah. But the transition period of that towards like actual life, I struggled with for a long time. Like I had crazy thoughts what I was going to do then. Like I had a buddy, we went to the Air Force Academy, like the recruiter. I was like, I want to be a fighter pilot. Mm-hmm. And then I went, like, I had all this great, then I was like, oh, I want to be like a Navy SEAL type guy. I want to go like join Special Forces. And I thought like all these different crazy things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then when I kind of like stumbled upon my startup and realizing that the entrepreneurial route was probably the best for me and that's where I was most passionate, then it helped. But there was like 6 months of uncertainty that I felt of like, oh shit, what if I don't recover from this?
Right. And just kind of wandering and like lost in the world at that point.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. And that was the first time I ever had that. Like, I still was 100% certain I was going to go back to snowboarding. Like, it didn't deter me at all from getting injured again. I wasn't scared about that point. Mm-hmm. But it was the first time, other than my girlfriend's dad asking me what after snowboarding, that I realized that, like, hey, like I got to start thinking about what I'm going to do with my life here if it doesn't work out.
Have you ever had a similar feeling happen again?
Every single day as an entrepreneur, you wake up hoping that your business survives another 24 hours. And it's a beautiful feeling when you get your business to a point where you're past that and you know your business can survive. It's now just maximizing that, right? But still as an entrepreneur, you kind of get that like heart palpitation feeling all the time because you're always putting out fires. And I think like with my background in snowboarding, maybe like the adrenaline junkie type thing kind of ties into it, right? Where like I like, a little bit of chaos going on sometimes.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
trying to overcome it and that stuff. Like it doesn't scare me.
Yeah.
Fair. Awesome. Yeah. And then, so like the other thing was in regards to, like you said, running is one of your new sports now, or your new like physical activities that you've taken a liking to. With all your injuries throughout the life, and again, back to the back injury there, but also like your knees, like a lot of impact that's getting taken during snowboarding there. How has that impacted running? Do you find like you're sore all the time? Do you have like a big like stretching regimen or anything like that? Like how do you combat those sort of things?
So my snowboarding coach, Kevin Koning's like, my first like real mentor in my life. He had probably broken like 50 or 60 bones. And I remember him when he was in like his 20s, his doctor telling him, he's like, you're going to be in pain for the rest of your life if you stop physical activity. So whenever I'm doing some sort of physical activity now, I think of the exact same thing the doctor telling him that is that if I stop physical activity and being active, then I'm probably going to have pain and start dealing with the issues. So I've just kind of chosen to live like an active lifestyle for forever and just push through the pain when I do have it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes a lot more sense. You know what I mean? Because like, if you're not moving your muscles, you try moving that after 6 months.
Object in motion stays in motion, right? So there's a big impact on that. But
for real. But yeah, I guess Jack, anything else you wanna get off your chest or promote there to the audience?
Plugins.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in like they want to get exposure to a real estate fund, buying apartment buildings, like we've had great returns on it and brought on a bunch of partners. So feel free to reach out. My Instagram's Bernstone Capital. So if you're interested in kind of anything real estate, reach out. Or if you're interested on the fund side or coaching or anything like that, always happy to connect with people.
All right, and then maybe in 6 months we'll be able to shoot this episode on the boat, or next summer.
In 6 months,
we'll do that. We'll do that.
It'll be winter.
Next summer.
We'll do it in the spring. Yeah. Film on the boat.
Dope.
Fortunately, the weather wasn't too cooperative today, but next time for sure.
All right, awesome, man.
No, man, it was awesome to sit.
Really appreciate you taking the time, and for those who don't know and took the time to listen this far, like Jack is my coach, and like literally like changed my perspective and like my whole direction, and I mean that. You know what I mean? Like it's worth it to hire like a mentor who's actually teaching you stuff, because like man, like the whole like job, like getting paid per hour, you're like, you know what I mean, like what's your hour worth, like you really instill that in me, right? So that's why we have this podcast, to really like bring this coaching like to the masses, right? So thank you so much, Jack, and really appreciate it, brother.
No, I appreciate it, man. I'm super happy to work with you, and this has been a great opportunity, so stoked to be on the show. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and follow Jack as well.
There you go.
Cheers.